Well done, Sacramento Kings. Well done. You did it. You made the absolute worst decision you could make today. Why? Because it was easy. Mike Brown's your fall guy. Congratulations. You just fired the only successful head coach you've had in nearly 2 decades. Welcome back to basketball hell, everybody. At least it's warm.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News, and I've been through it with you, and we're right back on it. The coaching carousel is back in Sacramento after the Kings made the horrendous but not at all surprising decision today to fire Sacramento Kings head coach Mike Brown. But before we get into the completely disrespectful way of how they did it, let's just state the obvious right out off the bat. This fixes nothing. It changes nothing. You think the problem is going to be gone? Poof. The Sacramento Kings are going to take the floor at Crypto.com Arena tomorrow night against the Los Angeles Lakers, and everything magically is going to be fine. Now, I'm not predicting that the Sacramento Kings will automatically lose on Saturday. In fact, it would be the most Kings thing ever for the Kings to end their losing streak and win this game, so that those of you who are blinded and confused by this awful decision that the Kings made today will think, oh, well, it turns out Mike Brown was actually the problem. I wouldn't be surprised if the Kings somehow win this game on Saturday at all. But hey, you can pull the wool over my eyes or try and put the blindfold over my eyes. I see right through it because I've seen what we've all seen over the past 2 decades of this organization's history. This is a disaster for the Sacramento Kings. An absolute disaster. And while Mike Brown, of course, was not blameless by any means, and I've been consistent with that, even if I've tried to defend Mike Brown as much as I possibly can over the course of this season. Mike Brown is certainly not blameless for where the Sacramento Kings are at. And I understand, because I said it at the time, last night's loss to the Detroit Pistons and how the Sacramento Kings lost to that game was the straw that broke the camel's back. We just knew something was going to happen. I was just hoping that the Kings would have learned just a little bit of a lesson from their history, especially this ownership group and this front office who have been a part of a lot of it. Hopefully, they would learn from their mistakes and not make this dumb knee-jerk reaction to fire the only successful head coach that they have had since Rick Adelman in 2006. I thought maybe finally common sense would win out with this organization. Changes absolutely needed to be made. But Mike Brown was not the first domino that needed to fall, even if it was the easiest and biggest domino to push over. It's a complete wrong decision for this organization. And like I said, to make it worse, the way it happened is pathetic, and the Sacramento Kings should be absolutely ashamed of how they handled this situation. Because I went to the Golden One Center today. I went to the Sacramento Kings practice facility, where the Kings allowed Mike Brown to run a full practice as normal. We walk into the building, the first thing we see is Mike Brown doing the rounds. He walks up to De'Aaron Fox, has a one-on-one conversation with De'Aaron Fox. If you're a lip reader and you want to look at it on my Twitter account, you can do so, at @MattGeorgeSack. You can see it there. He goes over to Trey Lyles, to DeMar DeRozan, to Jay Crowder, and has a conversation with the three of them. There's a lot of leadership, a lot of voices in that trio. Mike has a conversation with them. Mike Brown meeting center court, as he always does, with his two lead assistants, Jay Triano, who's in charge of the offense, Luke Laux, who's in charge of the defense. Mike continuing as normal. After that, he steps to the media scrum and has a 15 to 20 minute conversation with the media where, I shouldn't say unlike last night, but very different from last night and last night's tone of his clear frustration and him calling out his players and calling out De'Aaron Fox for how the Kings lost that game against the Pistons. Mike Brown takes accountability upon himself, starts listing off the things that he did wrong, starts pointing out the belief that he still has in this team to ultimately play the way that he believes the Sacramento Kings can play, pointing to De'Aaron Fox's growth as a leader, right? Saying all the right things, proceeding as if he believed that he was going to continue to be the head coach of the Sacramento Kings, moving on from that loss and trying to make the most out of the opportunity of today. He then gets in his car, apparently, is on his way to the airport to board the team plane and fly to Los Angeles for tomorrow night's game when he is informed by the Kings that he is fired. So the only head coach that has done anything for you in the last 2 decades, who a year and a half ago was the unanimous NBA Coach of the Year, who came in and his first words to this organization was holding everybody accountable, talking about the soul of the organization and how all 3 levels need to hold each other accountable and be bought into what they're trying to do here. That man who has championed change for this organization and immediately given you results. That man, you didn't just fire when things started getting rough. You fired after letting him proceed throughout his duties of the day as if nothing was wrong. You allowed him to go out and speak to the media again like nothing was wrong and nothing was different. And after all of that, then you decide to fire him. You know, it doesn't surprise me at all. It doesn't surprise me at all the amount of people that are coming out today in support of Mike Brown and how many of these names that I'm about to read for you have been done dirty or done wrong by this Kings organization in the past. I'm talking about Mike Malone. Mike Malone, who straight up lit a torch underneath the Kings organization and owner Vivek Ranadive, because Mike Malone was treated terribly by the Sacramento Kings. And by the way, this move that the Kings made tonight, this decision to fire Mike Brown, is the worst decision this organization has made since the firing of Mike Malone. You have DeMarcus Cousins taking to Instagram saying, Mike Brown ain't the problem. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of DeMarcus Cousins in his time here in Sacramento, and I believed a breakup needed to be happened, or both sides needed to move on. But we all know the way that ended was not great. So DeMarcus has more than his fair share of feelings towards this organization. George Karl weighing in. Whether you like George Karl or not, George Karl came on the Locked On Kings podcast years ago and explained to me and explained to you listeners what it was like sitting down at a table with Vivek Ranadive, Vlade Divac, Pete D'Alessandro, and all of these advisors. Too many cooks in the kitchen. So he's seen it. He's experienced it. Then you have well-respected names like Steve Kerr, like Rick Carlisle, who are chiming up and talking about how shocked, how disappointed they are by the decision of the Sacramento Kings, having Mike Brown's back. The amount of people, and there are going to be more, speaking up in support of Brown or speaking up blatantly against the Sacramento Kings organization, that speaks volumes. The Kings are 100% the bad guy here. The Kings do not look good here because everybody with a brain and a set of eyes or even a set of ears can see, can hear, can tell that Mike Brown was not the problem with this organization. Mike Brown was not the reason the Sacramento Kings are on this 5-game losing streak. He's not completely blameless, but he certainly is not the first guy that should be taking the fall. But this is what it's like to be a head coach in the NBA. I say bravo to Mike Brown and his team for making sure he got every penny he could out of the Sacramento Kings organization this past summer. This is why coaches do it. Because they know at any point they can be blamed for their roster or their front office, or in this case, both not holding up their end of the bargain. Mike Brown was fired because the general manager didn't do his job. Mike Brown was fired because his star fell asleep and straight up blew the game last night. I have it on pretty good authority that if the Kings win this game last night, if the way they lost doesn't happen, Mike Brown is still the head coach of the Sacramento Kings. Mike Brown is in Los Angeles right now getting ready for the Lakers. It's because of how you lost that game that Mike Brown got fired today, but it wasn't Mike Brown that lost that game. It was your star who took to the podium afterwards and said it didn't matter what happened. And he doesn't know where the organization goes from here. Now, I'm not going to take this platform and take this opportunity to start dragging De'Aaron Fox through the mud, because I actually wholeheartedly believe that De'Aaron Fox liked Mike Brown, that the two of them had a great relationship. Doesn't mean that that relationship didn't sour over the last couple of weeks. Maybe that's possible. And you have De'Aaron Fox's wife, Rasay Fox, responding to people on social media today, making sure they know, or at least sharing, that De'Aaron Fox didn't have anything to do with this decision. I do not believe at this point in time, I do not believe, nor do I have reason to believe, that De'Aaron Fox went to Monte McNair or Vivek Ranadive and said, you got to get Mike out of here. I don't believe that. But I also have a hard time believing that Monte McNair, or maybe what we should be saying, Vivek Ranadive, would make this decision without consulting De'Aaron Fox, especially if this decision is in an attempt to convince De'Aaron Fox to re-sign with the organization and stay here. I'm not convinced at all, that De'Aaron Fox is going to be here long term. And I don't think that this, going through another coaching carousel, going back to basketball hell, where De'Aaron Fox started his career, I don't believe at all that this is the right way, or this is the way that De'Aaron Fox wants to proceed to remain here in Sacramento. We got a lot more to dive into. I think this needs to be the start of a full reset for this organization. I'll dive into what that means. Plus, Doug Christie was named the interim head coach. Of course, we're all rooting for Doug. We'll talk about that. And like I said, we talked to Mike Brown at today's press conference. We talked to him minutes before he got fired. So I think it's worth hearing what Mike Brown had to say, because there are some interesting comments that, in hindsight, I think matter a lot and also speak to how much of a pro Mike Brown is on his way out. That's all still to come here on Locked On Kings. Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Whether you're happy or upset with the decision to fire Mike Brown, hey, maybe you're curious to see what this looks like. Well, the next time the Sacramento Kings play at home, where I know they've been abysmal, it's on Monday night against Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, and the Dallas Mavericks. Well, if you're looking for tickets to that game, any Kings game, any comedy show, any concert, theatrical production, you name it, you need to be getting your tickets on Game Time. The deals you're going to get on Game Time are second to none. They have the Game Time guarantee, which means if you find the same tickets on another site for cheaper, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. They also have a feature that's so simple and yet so effective. It's their all-in pricing feature, which shows you up front the exact amount of money that you're going to pay for your seat. How many times have you picked seats, right? You think it's going to be this price, and you get all the way to that final checkout screen, and you see $20, $30, $40 worth of fees added on at the end. That can sometimes decide or change your decision to buy the tickets or not. It certainly feels like a punch to the gut, right? Game Time gets rid of that. The price you see for your seats has all the fees put into it. So what you see for that seat is what you are paying for that seat. No fees added on at the very end. This is just a couple of examples of the great stuff and great deals you're going to get on Game Time. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Locked On Kings is also brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or you did not know you were paying for? Or maybe you were even paying for twice. Hey, that's happened to me. It's easy to do with the amount of subscriptions in our world today. Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal financial assistant at your fingertips. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions and saving members up to an average of $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. One of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel some of the services that I straight up forgot that I had or didn't know that I have. It's easier than you think. You'll actually be surprised. Use the app. You might think you're not paying for anything you don't want to pay for, and then that one or two things pops up, and that's the difference of $5, $10, $15, $20, $25 a month that you didn't even realize. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. In my opinion, the only way firing Mike Brown makes a itty bitty, tiny, little smidge of sense is if this is the start of a complete organizational reset. Now, I'm not talking about Vivek Ranadive and ownership selling the team. I'm realistic to that. But how in the world should anybody, inside and outside the organization, why should anybody have any confidence whatsoever in Monte McNair's decision to hire the next head coach? Because this is kind of a pattern for Monte McNair. He inherited Luke Walton from the Vlade Divac regime, right? He inherits Luke Walton. Things aren't going great. During the offseason in September, he commits to Luke Walton publicly. Whether or not it was his decision, we don't know. But he's the face, he's the GM, he's the leader, he is the one that supposedly is making that choice, and he publicly comes out and says, we believe in Luke Walton. Luke Walton's our coach going forward. 2 months later, the Kings fire Luke Walton because they got off to a terrible start. Right? Now you bring in the Mike Brown era. Mike Brown comes in, has success right away. Unanimous coach of the year. Earns the contract extension that he got this summer, which, by the way, puts him under the team payroll until 2027. A multi-year contract extension he 100% deserved. Now, obviously, as we remember, there was clearly some hesitation, whether it had to do with dollar figures or whether or not the Kings wanted to fully commit to Mike Brown as their head coach going forward. But ultimately, they agree to a deal. They sign Mike Brown. Months later, they fire him. So technically, Monty has only hired one coach, but he's committed to two and then fired them shortly after. Does anybody, Bueller, does anybody have any faith at this point in time in Monte McNair and this front office making the right long-term coaching decision for this organization? And maybe you're screaming at me right now, Matt, Monty isn't making the decision. It's Vivek. It's ownership. If that's the case, then what the hell is Monte McNair even doing there? What is Wes Wilcox doing there? Are they just lame ducks? Are they just there to be figureheads and hold the spot? If that's the case, all the merrier. Get rid of them and reset. This organization needs to reset. Front office gotta go, in my opinion. And I know it's a lot harder to do that in season, especially a month and a half or whatever ahead of the trade deadline. If you need to wait till this offseason to make that happen, fine. But I don't see a world, unless the Sacramento Kings have this miracle turnaround that I do not believe is going to happen, no matter how much I love Doug Christie and believe in Doug Christie. I don't think it's going to happen. So I don't see a scenario where Mike Brown is gone and everything else just stays the same going forward. That the Kings just carry on, business as usual. If they think that's going to happen, they're lying to themselves. So I think the front office has to go, and I do think that this is the end of De'Aaron Fox in Sacramento. Maybe it doesn't happen today. Maybe it doesn't happen before this trade deadline, even though I think at this point, maybe it probably should. If not, then it should happen this offseason. It should happen with, if you do get rid of this front office and get a new front office regime in there, if you do bring in a new front office, then their first order of business, like Monty's first order of business was to sign De'Aaron Fox to a long-term contract extension. I think the first order of business of the next general manager group or front office group is to find the right trade or find a way to move on from De'Aaron Fox. I don't think it makes any sense for Fox to stay here long-term. And it's crazy how time, even a short period of time, changes things. This past summer, I was at Hardwood Palace in Rockland, where De'Aaron Fox was hosting a basketball camp. And we got the opportunity to speak with Fox. Optimism was high, despite the fact that how last season ended, right? This was before Malik Monk was signed, before the DeMar DeRozan signing, but Mike Brown had just signed his contract extension. And De'Aaron Fox spoke about how great it was to have that consistency in the organization of a coaching staff. These comments, very interesting now after everything that's gone down. Here's De'Aaron Fox this summer.
But I mean, we always talk about, having that type of stability. Obviously, it's not saying that you want to become stagnant or anything like that, but just knowing that you're going to have kind of a core and then a coach and obviously in this league, Monty Williams just got, fired or dismissed today. So it could always change in the blink of an eye. You never know, but just to kind of feel like you have that stability going forward is definitely great, and you look to build off of that. If you count Alvin, I think this is my fourth coach, so this is my fourth coach, and I kind of came into a situation that was anything but stable. But for us, I feel like we got better, and then obviously we kind of took a step back. We won 2 less games, but you dropped 6 spots, especially with the way that the West is going. But like I said, just having that stability helps in the long run, I feel like.
Well, congrats, De'Aaron, because that instability is back. That instability is back, and I believe it's, again, a one-way ticket to De'Aaron Fox leaving this organization, whether it's by trade or if the Kings are stubborn enough to hold on to him over the next season and some change, the remainder of this season and next season, and let him leave by himself on his own in free agency for nothing. De'Aaron Fox's days just feel numbered at this point. Well, he did say there in that clip, things can change in the blink of an eye. Well, they have. Here we are at a point that I never, ever, ever thought that we'd be in. Sacramento Kings on a 5-game losing streak. All 5 of those games at home. Kings 6-12 at home. And they just fired Mike Brown, the only successful head coach they've had since 2006. It's unbelievable. But now the Doug Christie era begins. Doug Christie was named the interim head coach of the Sacramento Kings for the foreseeable future. More than likely, Doug Christie will finish out this season as the interim head coach of the Sacramento Kings. At this time, and I'm going to check my phone just to make sure I haven't gotten any kind of confirmation or anything like that. At this time, we do not know about the future of Luke Laux and Jay Triano, who, again, were the lead assistants of Mike Brown. Luke in charge of the defense, Jay in charge of the offense. As far as I understand, more than likely they will stay. I don't think there would be any reason for the Kings to get rid of them unless they chose to leave with Mike. And I certainly don't think Doug Christie would have any issue with having them stay here. So we don't know about them. But what I do know about Doug is a couple things. Number one, there's opportunity in chaos, right? And this is a huge opportunity for Doug Christie. Now, the vast majority of the time, not just in the Kings history, but in the NBA history, interim head coaches don't do well because you're inheriting an unstable situation where, like the Sacramento Kings are right now, changes are being made, and more than likely those changes short-term are not great for winning and for basketball. Maybe there are changes that need to happen. In this case, the Mike Brown firing, in my opinion, absolutely did not need to happen. But clearly some kind of change needed to happen for this organization. And now Doug Christie has this proverbial clipboard fall into his lap. Hey, you're in charge, bud. Here's what I also know. Doug Christie is as well respected as it gets. He is loved by players and coaches, but especially players around the league. And he is loved in that locker room. I also have had the privilege of working with Doug Christie before when he and I both worked at Sacktown Sports 1140 radio together. So I understand not just Doug's incredible basketball IQ, and of course he's a legend here in Sacramento for his time as a player during the Glory era. I also know how much Doug loves the game, loves this team, loves this organization, and how much he wants this. Now, he didn't want Mike Brown to be fired. Of course not. Doug completely supported Mike Brown. But this is an opportunity for Doug that he might not ever get again. This is his opportunity to prove that he is capable of being an NBA head coach. I am, of course, rooting for the man. I am not going to actively root against Doug Christie and the Sacramento Kings to fail so that Doug doesn't make the most out of his opportunity just because I was a fan of Mike Brown and believe that firing Mike Brown was the wrong choice. Just because I'm very, very upset at this organization's decision does not mean that I'm not hoping for a miracle, magical turnaround. If it does happen too, at no point will I ever admit that Mike Brown was the problem because there's nothing to admit. He was not and is not the problem. And I will take that to my grave. I am more than confident in that, just like I felt like the same way Mike Malone was clearly not the problem. And that's canon at this point, right? Nobody in Sacramento or outside of Sacramento looks at the Mike Brown firing the Mike Malone firing from years ago and says, yeah, Mike Malone deserved that. Nobody does. That's the same way we're going to feel about Mike Brown 6, 7, 8 years from now. I'm almost confident in that. I'm just hoping that it's not 6, 7, 8 straight years of losing. I'm rooting for Doug Christie. I wish him, of course, the absolute best. And I know for the most part, Kings fans do too. I just hope that this organization is not setting him up to fail. Because more often than not, interim head coaches are set up to fail. Coming up, comments from Mike Brown. The final comments from Mike Brown as the head coach of the Sacramento Kings literally minutes before he was fired today. I have that for you right here on Locked On Kings. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by Robinhood and Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Here are some of the final words of Mike Brown as a head coach. Again, before the Sacramento Kings disrespectfully fired Mike by making him talk to the media and run a practice beforehand while he was apparently on his way to the airport. That's according to Mike Malone, who shared that in his pregame press conference today. Mike Malone talking about and sharing his disgust for how the Sacramento Kings treated Mike Brown. Here were some of the things that Mike Brown said, some of his comments. Of course, he was asked about being a head coach of an underperforming team, right? There's pressure with that. People are gunning for you. People think you should be fired. You tend to be the fall guy. Lo and behold, of course, he ended up being the fall guy in this scenario. But Mike Brown spoke to the media today, again, just minutes before he was fired, about the responsibility that comes with being a head coach and how it's just part of the job.
You know, that's part of it. That's why I get paid the money that I get paid. But at the end of the day, you also know when you go through adverse times, you know who was there, who was truly there for you. Because, you know, people will jump off the bandwagon quick. And the support, wherever it may come from, may not always be there, you know. But that's part of what I have to deal with, not just for myself, but holding everybody together. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm okay with anybody criticizing me because, again, I get paid to handle that. I get paid to get us through this. But whether it's anybody that's close, staff, players, friends, family, you know, you'll be able to tell who was on the who jumped off a little bit when we had some trying times, and you just always remember that as you go forward because you know who's truly in the foxhole with you and who's not. But I believe I'm going to handle all the smoke, no matter where that smoke comes from, because that's what I'm paid to do.
From my conversations with Mike Brown, especially some of the off-the-record conversations when the camera was off, when there weren't interviews happening, and I know I'm not the only media member alone in this, one thing that I knew for certain about Mike Brown is he 100% believed in what he was doing. And he was so confident in it that he was willing to lose his job over it. He was willing to hold his players to a standard, to believe that they could be more than just what they're supposed to be. Believe that Malik Monk could be more of a defender than he is, or De'Aaron Fox could be the superstar defender that Mike has gotten him to look like at times. And he held them to that standard because he believed that this team was capable of being more than what we labeled them to be, myself included, what they were on paper, more than just an offensive team and more than just a team that had to beat you by outscoring you 130 to 125 every single night. Mike believed wholeheartedly in what he was doing, and that never wavered. Didn't mean he was so stubborn that he wasn't open to notes. He involved his coaching staff in a lot of decisions. He even implemented things like crashing the offensive glass, which has been a major emphasis for the Kings this season, or it was going into this season. It was a major emphasis in training camp. That came from Monty McNair in the front office and their analytics, not from Mike Brown. So Mike was open-minded. He'd listen to people. He'd challenge them, but he'd listen to them in how they believed this team should play and how they should operate. And if he believed it was the correct move to make, he would hand them the keys and encourage them to do that. He put a lot of responsibility in formerly Jordy Fernandez, who's now, of course, the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets on the defensive end, and now Luke Laux. He put, of course, so much responsibility in the hands of Jay Triano for the offense. And then he trusted his assistants, from Doug Christie to Lindsey Harding. So you can go down the list. The amount of assistants that he's had, that he's empowered in his time here in Sacramento, and always gave them the credit immediately, especially when he was named the unanimous coach of the year. Right? Mike wholeheartedly believed in what he was doing here. That never wavered, and I promise you it hasn't now that he's lost his job. And I think, honestly, the Kings need more of that. Kings need more of that stability that they have willing. You know what's funny? Mike Brown is being blamed for what he's been saying throughout the course of the season. Mike Brown has said, like, the Kings are losing games because they continue to shoot themselves in the foot. Self-inflicted wounds, mistakes. That's what's cost the Kings so many of these games this season. By being fired, Mike is being blamed for the teams making those mistakes and shooting themselves in the foot. And while, again, I don't think he's completely blameless, by firing Mike, because they believe he's to blame for the Kings shooting themselves in the foot, by firing Mike, what are the Kings doing? They're shooting themselves in the foot. Sometimes you don't need to let anybody talk. Just let the actions speak for them. And the actions of this Kings organization today and over the years consistently point to ineptitude. And Mike Brown was the first guy to start to turn that around and right that ship. But as soon as it started taking on a little bit of water, you threw him overboard. Congrats. Congrats, Kings. Mike, of course, spent a lot of time today also talking about leadership. He talked about the skill of taking accountability. And what I want you to notice from this clip is that Mike acknowledges that this question is being asked with De'Aaron Fox in mind, based off of not just what happened in last night's game, but how De'Aaron Fox refused to take accountability in his post-game press conference. But Mike does not use this opportunity to further pile on De'Aaron Fox. Again, he makes it about the team, all the leaders, and himself. Take a listen.
I'm dating myself now, but I'm 54 years old, and I've been through a lot in this business. I've been through way more good times than bad times, but I've been through some bad times. And, I've been fortunate, blessed, lucky, however you want to call it, to be around great players and great coaches. And the crazy part about it, I've been around coaches that have won titles, and they have a lot of smoke that they got to face when their little stretch of adversity is not great. And so I've seen them handle it. I've seen the players handle it. And, you see older players in leadership roles or that are just a part of a roster. You see it in football all the time, especially from the quarterback. Those couple of interceptions, he says, hey, it's my bad. That's something that's a learned skill, and I started off with I'm 54 because I had to learn that too. As a young guy, you always just kind of look at the X's and O's and you try to spill those out. Well, sometimes the X's and O's may come from the head coach or the coaching staff, or sometimes they may come from a certain player or a group of players or the whole team. And to show that you're human means sometimes you got to show that you're vulnerable. And I think at the end of the day, if we all learn that skill set, you know, I know you're probably talking about Fox, but at the end of the day, it's not just Fox, it's everybody. It's Fox, it's Domas, it's Malik. To be able to say, hey, you know what, I made a mistake here, I made a mistake there, that doesn't mean that it's all on them. But it's just acknowledging, yeah, I'm human, I made a mistake, I can be better, and I'm going to be better. That's something that you learn through experiences, and you learn from watching others and being around others that are okay taking on the accountability, because it's not easy. You know, you got the pressure of the world on you, and like I said before, there's a lot of smoke there, and not many people want to handle that smoke or know how to handle that smoke. And but it's something that over time you're either going to learn it or you're not. And in my opinion, most great leaders have that skill set. They know how and when to be vulnerable or to accept accountability or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, all of our guys are more than willing to take it on. It's just a matter of understanding how and when.
It's clear the Sacramento Kings, especially this season, have a leadership problem, especially on-court leadership. So how did the Kings choose to address that? They fired the only real leader that they have. You want to correct your leadership problem by getting rid of your only real leader. Make it make sense. Again, I'm not saying Mike Brown's blameless. I'm not saying Mike Brown's leadership has always been perfect. That sounds like a leader to me. How he's talked throughout this season has sounded like a leader to me. And he has to face the music after every single game, not just most games like Fox or Sabonis or others do. And Mike, it's part of the job. And he leads. And he's led this organization to the only success that they've had in 20 years. I know I keep saying that over and over and over again because it's true. And we can't forget it. He led this organization to that. And they got rid of him because they have a leadership problem. Finally, this was the last question I asked Mike. Didn't know it at the time, but this is the last question I asked Mike as the head coach of the Sacramento Kings. I asked him about the on-court leadership and if his leaders, specifically Fox, Sabonis, and DeRozan, were being extensions of him and his coaching staff. If they were taking what the coaches were saying and bringing that onto the floor as the on-floor leaders and making sure the team in the moment, in games, were holding each other accountable. Here's what Mike said.
Mike, from the outside perspective, at least from our distance, it seems like the on-court communication and leadership is sometimes lacking. Do you, from your perspective on the bench, specifically with Fox and Sabonis and DeRozan mainly, do you feel that they are an extension of you and your coaching staff's voice on the floor, communicating with the guys what needs to happen and the accountability in-game, on the floor, outside of the bench?
I think we're getting better with it, you know, and again, these guys haven't necessarily been in leadership roles on, maybe DeMar has, especially in Toronto. I don't know how much he won in Chicago, but I know in Toronto they won at a pretty high level, and he and Kyle, I think, were the leaders of that team. But most of our team hasn't been in a position of leadership in an environment where there's been consistency on the winning side of the ball, and so it takes time. It takes other guys coming in that have won, and that's one of the things that Jay's good. Jay's been to 2 finals, and so listening to him talk at times is better than me talking because it's from your peer. And so to be around guys that have won at a high level and know what they did when he was with that team in the finals. He was with two different teams in the finals. Gives a different perspective than what I can say all the time, because I can keep saying it, but it's, and I'm not their parents. I'm not their parents. I'm not their parents. I'm not their parents. I'm not gonna say it 26 times, but I'm not their parents. But it's like, if you're around somebody all the time and you're an adult or whatever, and they're not kids. They're not kids. They're not kids. They're gonna get tired of you or tune your voice out a little bit, and so to have some accountability amongst them on the floor and in the locker room is always a good thing. And you can't have enough of it. Do we have more now today than a month ago? Not even close. We got a lot more. And even 3 months ago, a whole lot more. But we need more. We need more, because at the end of the day, every team that I've been a part of as a coach, every successful team that I've been a part of as a coach, the leadership does come from the coach to a certain degree, but it more so comes from within. And there's nothing better than having leadership from within that permeates throughout the rest of the team.
And this organization doesn't have it. They don't have it. And firing Mike Brown is not going to change that. I'm not trying to make you feel worse than you already do. And hey, maybe you were team fire Mike Brown and you think is a good day for the Sacramento Kings. If you feel that way, that's fine. You can disagree with me wholeheartedly. I'm glad you're finding some positive out of this today. I'm telling you, I think it's time to really buckle up, because I think it's going to get worse. I think this is the start of another dip into not just mediocrity, but into darkness and ineptitude from this organization again. Hopefully they can climb out of it quicker than 16 freaking seasons. But the Kings are moving in a horribly wrong direction because of this move. And it's just hard to feel anyway at this point in time other than that. But a new era, I guess, begins tomorrow. Kings, Lakers with interim head coach Doug Christie at the helm. We'll see if the Kings look any different. Of course, I'll have a post-game podcast after that game. Plus, tomorrow inside the Golden One Center, the Stockton Kings are playing a game, and we are expecting the debut, at least G League debut, of Devin Carter. So maybe he will help bring a fresh face and some new energy to the Sacramento Kings here in this new era. I do want to say really quickly before I wrap up, I wouldn't necessarily consider Mike Brown a friend or anything like that. We didn't have that kind of relationship, but he was always so genuine, kind, invested in the questions that you would ask, the conversations that you would have, and you could tell that he wanted to teach the game. There are some coaches that get annoyed by questions about fundamentals of basketball or fundamentals of what they're trying to teach because we're media and we ask all these questions, we say all these criticisms, but we don't actually know how to play. We didn't play the game at a high level, blah, 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 blah. A lot of coaches feel that way. Of course, a lot of players feel that way too. Mike would be the first guy to pull you aside and try and walk you through and help you understand the game and what he was trying to do, what the Sacramento Kings were trying to do. Mike Brown loved the game of basketball so much and loves the game of basketball so much that he wants to share it with everybody. Mike is going to be fine. He's going to be on a bench very, very soon if he wants to be. I think the Golden State Warriors would be very, very smart in just scooping him right back up and putting him right next to Steve Kerr there. If he wants to be. Mike's going to be great. I wish Mike nothing but the absolute best and thank him wholeheartedly for how he treated me, how he treated other members of the media, and quite frankly, how he helped make Sacramento Kings basketball fun and exciting again. That's what he did. He ushered in the best that we've had since my childhood. He deserves all the credit for that. Certainly more credit for that than blame like he's received for what's going on right now. Thank you, Mike, and now we'll see what's next. Now I want to hear from you. Your thoughts on Mike Brown being fired? Hey, if you're in the comment section on YouTube, let it fly. You want to hit me up on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack or Blue Sky at MattGeorgeSack, or you can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Let's talk about it. Tomorrow's a new day. We'll see how it goes. You have been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.